My grandfather, Dr. Mohsen Ziai, was born on July 29, 1927, in a small town called Torbat-e-Heydariye in northeastern Iran. He was born into 7 generations of physicians. His grandfather sent 3 of his sons, including my grandfather's father, to Europe to complete the medical school or training. At the age of 5, Dr. Ziai's entire family moved to Mashhad, which was the largest city in the province. He was very close to his mother, his uncles and aunts, and his 2 younger sisters, Patty and Soraya. At the age of 14, my grandfather had appendicitis, and an American doctor, Dr. Cochran, helped to diagnose the problem. When asked what was the best medical school in the U.S., Dr. Cochran replied, Johns Hopkins, and this idea stuck in my grandfather's brain. A year later, his father passed away, and his family moved to Tehran to be with his grandfather. There, he went to Al-Bor Secondary School, a prestigious high school started by Americans. After graduating from Al-Bor's, my grandfather was accepted to the medical school at Tehran University, but his main goal was to go to the United States and make it to Johns Hopkins. Finally, he found a way at the age of 18. He said goodbye to his sisters, one of whom who was just getting married, and his mother and family. He knew he wouldn't see them for a very long time. He arrived in America in 1946 on a ship carrying GIs and their brides. When he arrived in New York City, one of the first things he did was go to the top of the Empire State Building. He taught himself English that summer by attending double features at the local movie theater and working in an ice cream shop for 40 cents an hour. He met his second brother-in-law this same summer in New Jersey, and they became best friends and later roommates in college. My grandfather was disappointed to find out he could not go directly to medical school, unlike Iran and Europe, where you can go right after high school. He was lucky to be accepted to Davis & Elkins in West Virginia, because at the time, the GI Bill allowed all the returning GIs to go to college, and there were so few spots open, but Davis & Elkins was happy to accept him.
And I wrote to them, and they immediately sent me an acceptance and the application in the same envelope.
He adjusted to the academic program, and pretty soon, Dean S. Benton Talbot, his wonderful mentor, placed him in an accelerated program, which lasted 2 years. He graduated magna cum laude in 1948. My grandfather recalls a conversation he had with Dean S. Benton Talbot just before he went off to Johns Hopkins.
He said, yes, I know that you've been going to the student union every day, a couple times a day, to see if there's a letter from your mother. She cares about you, and you care about your mother. These are all gifts that God has given you. Don't ever think that you're better than anybody else. Just be thankful to God for all of the gifts that God has given you. And that brought tears to my eyes. And I said, thank you, Dr. Talbot. I would not forget that.
Finally, his dream came true, to attend Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. After graduating from Johns Hopkins, he became an intern at the Harriet Lane Service in Johns Hopkins. He continued his training in pediatrics at Boston Children's Hospital. A philanthropic Iranian who lived in Washington, D.C. by the name of Mr. Namazi recruited my grandfather to help him start a world-class American-style hospital in a city by the name of Shiraz in central Iran. Together they hired several of my grandfather's colleagues and professors to come with them to Iran and work at Namazi Hospital. Now that he was back in Iran, he went to visit a famous pediatrician, the first in Iran, Dr. Mohammad Gharib. During his visit, he met Dr. Gharib's daughter, and they fell in love. They got married and she moved to Shiraz with him. Dr. Ziai was very proud of his accomplishments at Namazi Hospital, but he was also saddened that many Iranians still did not have access to basic medical care. With the help of the Shah's twin sister, he was able to visit China and observe what was called barefoot doctors in action. These were minimally trained doctors who delivered basic information about hygiene and preventative care.
We were really astonished by some of the things that these so-called barefoot doctors were doing, and some young people with very little education were able to do.
So, in Iran, my grandfather established a health program where students would come from villages and get basic training and then return to the villages in the mobile units to deliver health care. Today, most of these 65,000 villages have one of these health houses, and Iran has one of the highest rates of immunization and lowest rates of infant mortality in the world. My grandfather considered this project one of his greatest accomplishments. In 1977, a couple years before the Iranian Revolution, he and his family moved to Rochester, New York. At Rochester General Hospital, he became the chairman of the pediatrics department. Because Rochester was so cold, they moved to Northern Virginia 5 years later. In 1982, he became the chairman of the pediatrics department at Fairfax Hospital, when it was a small community hospital with only 64 beds. He had a vision to provide the best health care for children in all of Northern Virginia. Within 10 years, a new large wing was added to the hospital, devoted to women and children. To this day, if you walk into the lobby of this part of the hospital, you can see his portrait hanging on the walls. My grandfather, Dr. Mohsen Ziai, retired in 1999 with a great legacy of many awards and books, and training many medical students and residents over the years. I grew up only a few minutes away from my grandparents, and was lucky enough to see my grandfather often and be inspired by his actions.